For 35 years, my wife Patricia vanished every single Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. She told me she was going to the grocery store to clip coupons or volunteering at the library, and I never questioned her. I was just a mechanic with grease under my fingernails, happy to have a hot meal on the table and a woman who loved me. But when she passed away last week, I found out where she really went. And what I discovered inside that bank vault didn't just freeze my blood, it turned my own son into a monster. Before I tell you how I lost my wife and my only child in the same week, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps an old man share his truth. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Now let me tell you about the day I came home from her funeral. I stood on the porch of the small bungalow Patricia and I had shared for 4 decades. The black suit I wore felt tight and smelled of mothballs because I hadn't worn it since my brother's passing 10 years ago. I had just buried the love of my life. The dirt was still fresh on her grave, and the image of her casket being lowered into the ground was burned into my retinas. All I wanted was to sit in her favorite armchair, smell her lavender perfume, and cry in peace. I wanted silence. But when I unlocked the front door, I didn't hear silence. I heard the sound of wood splintering. Crash! Bang! It was coming from the back, from the small room Patty used as her sewing and paying bills sanctuary. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought we were being robbed. I grabbed the old baseball bat I kept behind the umbrella stand and shuffled down the hallway. My knees ached. Years of bending over Ford engines had ruined my joints, but the adrenaline pushed me forward. I kicked the door open, ready to fight a stranger. But the people tearing my wife's room apart were not strangers. They were family. David, my son, lowered a stack of files he was holding. He was sweating. His tie loosened, his expensive dress shirt stained with dust. He had pulled every drawer out of Patty's desk. Papers were scattered everywhere like confetti. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, was on her knee, digging through a shoebox of old receipts. She didn't even look ashamed. She looked annoyed that I had interrupted. David gasped, breathless. He didn't come to hug me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just kept rifling through papers. Dad, we are looking for the life insurance policy. The funeral director is going to want a check, and we need to find out where Mom hid the money. The lie was so lazy, it insulted my intelligence. I stepped into the room, stepping over a pile of knitting patterns. David, stop, I said, my voice shaking. The funeral is paid for. We paid for it 5 years ago with the pre-need plan. You know this. I told you this yesterday. David froze. He looked at Sarah. Sarah stood up, brushing dust off her black skirt. Well, there must be other accounts, Harold, she said, her voice sharp. Patty was always secretive. We just want to make sure your finances are secure. Secure. That was a lawyer's word, a predator's word. I looked at my son. He was 45 years old, a real estate agent who drove a leased luxury car but had borrowed $2,000 from us last Christmas to pay his heating bill. I knew that look in his eyes. It wasn't grief, it was panic. It was debt. Get out, I whispered. This is her room, put that back. I reached for the blue velvet diary David was holding. It was Patty's daily planner. She wrote everything in there, from grocery lists to the dates she planted her tomatoes. David pulled it back. I am trying to help you, old man, he snapped. You don't know how to handle this. I lunged forward. For a 72-year-old, I still had a grip strength built by turning wrenches. I grabbed the book. We tugged. The spine cracked. And that is when it fell out. A small plastic card hit the floor with a click. Next to it, a pocket calendar. Time seemed to slow down. David let go of the book and dove for the card. It was an old ATM card, the kind with the magnetic strip worn down. It was from First National Bank. I didn't bank at First National. We used the credit union. David grabbed the pocket calendar. He flipped through the pages frantically. Look at this, he muttered to Sarah. Every week, look. I looked over his shoulder. On every single Tuesday for the past year and the year before, that Patty had circled the date in red ink. She had written just 2 letters, FN, and a time. 10 a.m. First National, David whispered. His eyes went wide. The panic in his face was replaced by something uglier. Greed. Pure, naked greed. She had a secret account, David said, his voice rising in excitement. Mom had a secret account. She went there every week. Why would she go every week unless she was moving money? He turned to me. He was smiling now, a twisted, hungry smile that made my stomach turn. Dad, what is the PIN? What is the password? I don't know what you are talking about, I said, stepping back. She went to the library on Tuesdays. Don't lie to me, David shouted. He stepped into my personal space. He loomed over me. She was holding out on us. All these years acting like you were poor. Give me the code, Dad. I need that money. I don't have it, I said. David shoved me. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough. I stumbled back and fell onto the old floral sofa. My own son, the boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I worked double shifts for so he could have braces. He just shoved me down like I was a piece of trash, blocking his path to a gold mine. I clutched the armrest of the sofa, looking up at him. I saw Sarah checking the balance on her phone, calculating. I saw David gripping that bank card like it was a lifeline. And in that moment, as the sun began to set on the day of my wife's funeral, I realized the truth. I hadn't just lost my wife today. I had lost my son a long time ago. He wasn't mourning his mother. He was scavenging her bones. And I knew right then that I had to protect whatever was in that bank account. Not for the money, but to keep it away from him. The leather seat of David's rented Audi smelled like vanilla air freshener and stale cigarette smoke. I sat in the passenger seat staring out the window as the familiar streets of our town blurred by. It was a Tuesday morning. The sky was a cruel bright blue, indifferent to the fact that I was being kidnapped by my own son. David drove with one hand on the wheel and the other gripping his phone, ignoring the road to check his notifications. He was looking for a deposit notification, I knew. He was waiting for the windfall he believed my wife had hidden from us. We were heading to First National Bank. He had woken me up at 7 in the morning, banging on my bedroom door, throwing a pair of pants at me and telling me to get dressed. He didn't ask how I slept. He didn't ask if I had eaten breakfast. He just told me we had an appointment, and I wasn't going to make him late. When I tried to refuse, when I told him I wanted to stay home and mourn his mother in peace, he leaned in close. His breath smelled of coffee and desperation. He told me that if I didn't get in the car, he would make a phone call to Adult Protective Services. He said he would tell them I was confused, that I was leaving the stove on, that I was a danger to myself. He said the state nursing home had a long waiting list, but he knew a guy who could get me a bed in the basement ward by tonight. I looked at his profile as he drove. The jawline was the same as mine, but the eyes were hard. I realized then that the threat wasn't empty. He would do it. He would lock me away to get to that money. So I got in the car. When we pulled up to the bank, the building looked like a fortress. It was an old stone structure with heavy brass doors, the kind of place that whispered of old money and secrets. I had never stepped foot inside. Patty and I banked at the local credit union where the tellers gave you lollipops. This place was different. It was cold. David practically dragged me out of the car. He gripped my elbow, his fingers digging into the loose skin of my arm. To anyone passing by, it might have looked like a solicitous son helping his elderly father, but I could feel the tremor in his hand. It was the vibration of greed. We walked into the lobby. It was silent, the air conditioning humming a low note. A security guard nodded at us. David marched me straight to the reception desk, but before we could speak, a door opened to our left. An elderly man in a charcoal suit stepped out. He was tall, thin, with white hair combed back perfectly. He looked like he belonged to another century. Mr. Foster, the man said. His voice was soft, like dry leaves. David stopped. He looked confused. You know who we are. I am Mr. Sterling, the branch manager, the man said. He didn't look at David. He looked straight at me. His eyes were pale blue and filled with a strange mixture of pity and respect. Mrs. Foster told me this day would come. She told me you would be here on a Tuesday. David puffed out his chest. Yeah, well, we are here for her assets. I have power of attorney pending, but my father here is the executor. We need access to her safety deposit box. Now. Mr. Sterling didn't blink at David's aggression. He simply nodded at me. Please follow me, gentlemen. He led us through a heavy steel gate and down a flight of marble stairs. The air got cooler as we descended. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I was walking into the heart of my wife's secret life. 35 years. What had she been doing here for 35 years while I was fixing carburetors and changing oil? We entered the vault. It was a room lined from floor to ceiling with small metal drawers. It smelled of dust and copper. Mr. Sterling walked to a wall on the far side and pointed to a box at eye level. Number 404. He held out a hand. I need the key, Mr. Foster. I fumbled in my pocket. I had the small brass key David had taken from Patty's desk the night before. He had shoved it into my hand in the car, telling me not to drop it, or he would break my fingers. I handed it to the manager. Mr. Sterling inserted his master key, then mine. He turned them simultaneously. The lock clicked. The sound echoed in the small room like a gunshot. David pushed forward, practically shoving Mr. Sterling aside. He pulled the long metal box out of the wall. His hands were shaking so badly, the box rattled against the table he set it on. Open it, David hissed at me. I lifted the lid. I expected to see stacks of cash. David expected to see diamonds, gold bars, maybe stock certificates worth millions. He was practically salivating. But when the lid fell back, there was no shine of gold. There was no smell of old money. The box was almost empty. David made a sound like a wounded animal. He reached in and clawed at the contents. There were 3 things inside. A stack of paper receipts yellowed with age and held together by a brittle rubber band. A sealed white envelope. And a small silver USB drive, the kind you buy at an electronics store for $10. That was it. No, David whispered. No, no, no. He picked up the box and turned it upside down, shaking it violently. Nothing else fell out. Just the dust of 3 decades. Where is it? Where is the money? He threw the metal box across the room. It crashed against the wall with a deafening clang. Mr. Sterling stood by the door, his face impassive, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't move to stop him. David turned on me. His face was red, the veins in his neck bulging. You knew he screamed. You knew she spent it. Where did it go? Look at this. He grabbed the stack of receipts and threw them in my face. They fluttered down like dead leaves. I caught one. It was a receipt from a brokerage firm dated 1992, another from 1998. They were transaction records, but the amounts were blacked out with marker. She was playing the market, David shouted, pacing the small room. She was gambling. She lost it all. That stupid, selfish old woman. She came here every week to hide her losses. He slammed his fist onto the table. Or maybe she was giving it away. Maybe she had a boyfriend. Is that it? Was she paying someone? He saw the white envelope on the table. He snatched it up. It was thick. He ripped it open, tearing the paper in his haste. While he was distracted ripping at the envelope, my eyes fell on the silver USB drive. It sat innocuously on the table, small and cold. I didn't know what was on it. I didn't know much about computers. But I knew one thing. Patty had put it there. And Patty didn't do anything without a reason. If David saw it, he would destroy it or sell it. I moved my hand. It was a movement born of instinct, the same reflex that let me catch a falling wrench before it hit the concrete. I swiped the USB drive off the table and closed my fingers around it. In one smooth motion, I shoved my hand into the pocket of my old windbreaker. David didn't see. He was staring at the letter he had pulled from the envelope. It wasn't a bank statement. It was just a letter handwritten in Patty's neat cursive. He read the first line and crumpled it up. "It is just garbage," he spat. "Sentimental garbage. She left us nothing. Nothing." He looked at me, his eyes full of hate. It was the look of a man who had bet everything on a horse that died at the starting gate. He had already spent this money in his head. He had probably promised it to loan sharks, or used it to justify his debts. And now the hole he was in just got deeper. He lunged at me, grabbing the lapels of my jacket. I felt the USB drive press against my ribs. "You are useless," he snarled, his spit hitting my cheek. "Both of you. She is dead, and she left us rot. And you are just a burden." Mr. Sterling stepped forward then. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice steel, "if you do not lower your voice and remove your hands from your father, I will press the silent alarm. The police will be here in 3 minutes." David released me, shoving me back against the table. He ran his hands through his hair, breathing hard. He looked around the vault, looking for something to smash, something to steal. But there was nothing. Just steel walls and the ghost of his mother's secrets. He looked at me with a cold calculation that terrified me more than his rage. "Fine," he said. "No money. That changes plans." He grabbed my arm again, harder this time. "Come on, where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We are going to my house," David said, pulling me toward the door. "We are selling your bungalow. Sarah has already called a realtor. If Mom didn't leave cash, the house is the only asset left. We are selling it this week." "But that is my home," I stammered. "I have nowhere else." "You are not staying there alone," David said, dragging me up the marble stairs. "You are incompetent. Clearly. You didn't even know your wife was gambling away her savings. You need supervision. You are coming to live in our basement until the house sells. And then, well, then we will find a place for people like you. People like me." He meant people who were no longer of use. People who were just obstacles to a paycheck. As we walked out into the blinding afternoon sun, I felt the small, hard shape of the USB drive in my pocket. David thought the box was empty. He thought there was no treasure. But he was wrong. I had the treasure. I just didn't know how to unlock it yet. And as he shoved me into the car and engaged the child locks, trapping me in the back seat, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer a father. I was a prisoner. And my escape lay in that tiny piece of silver metal burning a hole in my pocket. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, and I heard the distinct sound of a deadbolt sliding into place from the other side. I stood in the middle of the room, blinking as my eyes adjusted to the gloom. It wasn't a guest room. It wasn't even a finished basement. It was a storage, damp dungeon that smelled of mildew and old cardboard. The floor was bare concrete that radiated a bone-deep chill through the soles of my shoes. In the corner sat a rusty metal cot with a thin mattress that looked like it had been dragged out of a dumpster. This was where they put the things they didn't want to look at anymore. Broken exercise equipment, boxes of old tax returns, and now me. I hadn't even taken off my jacket when the door opened again. Sarah stood at the top of the stairs, her silhouette framed by the warm light of the hallway. She didn't come down. She stayed on the landing as if the air down here might contaminate her. "Dad, give me your phone," she said. Her voice was sickly sweet, the kind of tone a nurse uses before sticking you with a needle. I instinctively put my hand over my pocket. "Why, Sarah? I might need to call someone." "You need rest, Harold," she said, descending one step, her hand held out expectantly. "You have been staring at that screen all day, reading those condolence messages. It is bad for your eyes. You are grieving. The doctor said you need to disconnect. You are agitating yourself." There was no doctor. I knew that. She knew that. This wasn't about my eyes. This was about isolation. She wanted to make sure I couldn't call a taxi or the police or a lawyer. She wanted to cut the cord to the outside world. I looked at her face. Her eyes were hard and calculating, scanning me for any sign of resistance. I realized in that moment that I was physically outmatched. I was 72 with bad knees. She was young and desperate. If I fought her, she might call David back. They might search me. And if they searched me, they would find the silver USB drive burning a hole in my inner pocket. I couldn't risk that. That drive was the only thing I had left of Patty, the only secret David hadn't managed to spoil. So I pulled my old flip phone out of my pocket. It felt heavy, like I was handing over my last lifeline. "Fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "If you think it is best, it is for your own good," she said, snatching the phone from my hand. "We just want you to heal. We will bring you some dinner later. Try to sleep." She turned on her heel and walked back up the stairs. The door slammed shut, and the lock turned again with a finality that echoed in the empty room. I was alone. I stood there for a long time listening. I heard the heavy thud of the front door upstairs. That was David leaving. He was probably heading to a bar to drink away the rage of finding an empty bank vault, or maybe he was meeting with the realtor already. That left Sarah guarding the prisoner. I moved to the cot and sat down. The springs screamed in protest. The room was silent save for the dripping of a pipe somewhere in the shadows. I needed to know what they were planning. I needed to know how much time I had. I looked up at the ceiling. The basement was unfinished, which meant the floor joists and ductwork were exposed. In the corner near the water heater, there was a large square vent that connected directly to the kitchen above. It was an old trick. When David was a teenager, I used to listen through the vents to make sure he wasn't sneaking girls in or smoking weed. I never thought I would be using it to spy on him and his wife to save my own life. I dragged a plastic milk crate over to the corner and stepped up onto it. My joints popped, but I ignored the pain. I pressed my ear against the cold, galvanized steel of the duct. At first there was only the rushing sound of the furnace fan. Then I heard it. The click of heels on tile. The sound of a cabinet opening. Ice clinking into a glass. Sarah was making herself a drink. Then her voice came through, clear and sharp. She was on the phone. "I told you to stop calling this number," she hissed. "I am handling it. David is handling it." I held my breath. She was talking to a creditor. I could hear the stress in her voice, the edge of panic that she hid so well behind her suburban smile. "Look," she said, her voice dropping lower. "We hit a snag at the bank today. The cash wasn't there." She paused, listening to the person on the other end. "No, do not threaten me," she snapped. "We have a backup plan. The old man is here. We have him contained. Contained. Like a virus. Like a stray dog. David is filing the paperwork with the court tomorrow morning," she continued. "We are claiming incompetence. Dementia. He is confused. He doesn't know where he is. Once we get the emergency guardianship, we can liquidate the assets." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Dementia. I could recite the firing order of a V8 engine in my sleep. I remembered the date of every anniversary, every birthday. But they were going to paint me as a senile old fool to strip me of my rights. "We are listing the bungalow next week," Sarah said, taking a sip of her drink. I could hear the ice rattle. "It is a teardown in a hot neighborhood. We already have a cash offer lined up from a developer. 400,000. That covers your loan and leaves us enough to float for a year. Just give us 10 days. $400,000. They were selling my life for $400,000. My home. The home where Patty planted her hydrangeas. The home where we sat on the porch swing and watched the world go by. They weren't just going to sell it. They were going to tear it down. Erase it. And with the money they would pay off their gambling debts and their leased cars and their pretenses of success. And what about me? I realized with a jolt of icy fear why David had been so insistent on bringing me here immediately. Why he hadn't let me go back to grab a change of clothes. They had probably changed the locks already. While we were at the funeral or while we were at the bank, they had a locksmith out there. If I managed to escape this basement and walk the 5 miles back to my house, my key wouldn't turn. I didn't have a home anymore. I was homeless. I was a ghost. Sarah laughed then, a cruel short sound. "Don't worry about him," she said. "Once the house sells, we will put him in that state facility off the highway. The one with the Medicaid beds. He won't know the difference. He will just stare at the wall until he dies. It is better this way." I stepped down from the crate. My legs were shaking so hard I almost fell. I sat back on the cot and put my head in my hands. The betrayal was complete. It wasn't just greed. It was hatred. They viewed me as an object, an obstacle to be removed and discarded. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Crying wouldn't help me. Patty wouldn't want me to cry. She would want me to fight. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the USB drive. It sat in my palm, small and silver and unassuming. David and Sarah thought the bank box was empty. They thought they had hit a dead end. But they were wrong. The treasure wasn't cash. It was information. Patty had spent 35 years building something, and she had locked it away on this drive. She knew David. She knew Sarah. She knew this day would come. I ran my thumb over the smooth metal. I didn't know what was on it. Maybe it was account numbers. Maybe it was a will. But whatever it was the only weapon I had. I looked around the damp basement. The shadows were lengthening. Night was coming. I was locked in. I had no phone. I had no allies. But I had the truth in my pocket. They thought they had captured a helpless old man. They thought I was finished. But they forgot where I came from. I fixed broken things for a living. I took engines that were seized and rusted and made them run again. I wasn't going to rot in this basement. I wasn't going to let them bulldoze my memories. I squeezed the USB drive tight until the edges dug into my skin. I needed to get out. I needed to find a computer. And I needed to do it tonight before they filed those papers in the morning. I looked at the small high window. It was painted shut and covered in grime. But it was glass, and glass could break. I looked at the door. It was solid wood, but the hinges were on the inside. A slow, cold anger began to burn in my chest, replacing the fear. They wanted a senile old man. Fine. I would play the part until I didn't have to anymore. But tonight, Harold Foster was going to break out of prison. And when I did, I was coming for them. Not with violence, but with the one thing they feared more than anything. Consequences. The lock tumbled again around 8 o'clock that evening. I had spent the last few hours sitting in the dark, listening to the house settle above me, and plotting escape routes that all seemed to end in failure. My joints were stiff from the cold, damp air of the basement, but my mind was racing like an engine redlining in neutral. When the door opened, light flooded down the stairs, blinding me momentarily. David descended first, carrying a tray with a glass of water and a sandwich that looked like it had been made as an afterthought. Behind him came a man I had never seen before. He was a short man with slicked-back hair and a suit that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. He carried a leather briefcase and smelled of expensive cologne that failed to mask the scent of stale tobacco. He looked like a shark that had learned to walk upright. David set the tray on a cardboard box and pulled up 2 folding chairs. "Dad, this is Mr. Reynolds," David said, his voice tight with forced cheerfulness. "He is a lawyer, a specialist in elder law. We brought him here to help us sort out this mess with Mom's estate." Mr. Reynolds sat down and opened his briefcase. He didn't offer to shake my hand. He pulled out a thick stack of documents and a gold fountain pen, placing them on the wobbly card table between us. "Mr. Foster, good evening," Reynolds said. His voice was smooth like oil. "I understand this is a difficult time." Your son tells me you are feeling a bit overwhelmed by your wife's passing, that you are confused about your assets. I looked at David. He was leaning against a support beam, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. I wasn't confused. I was trapped, but I knew I had to play the part. I am just tired, I muttered, hunching my shoulders to look smaller, more frail. I just want to go home. Exactly. Dad, and we want to get you settled, David interjected, stepping forward. But we can't do that until we secure the finances. Look, the house needs to be sold so we can pay for a nice place for you. We found a brochure for a facility called Golden Horizons. It is high-end, Dad. Heated floors, chefs, nurses around the clock. It is expensive, but if we sell the bungalow and liquidate Mom's remaining accounts, we can get you in there. He was lying. I knew Golden Horizons. It was the place they sent people when they wanted them to disappear comfortably. But David didn't have the money for that. He was going to dump me in a state-run warehouse and pocket the difference. Reynolds tapped the paper with his pen. To make this happen, Mr. Foster, we need you to sign this. It is a standard durable power of attorney. It simply allows David to handle the paperwork for you so you don't have to stress yourself with legal details. You just sign here, and David takes care of the rest. He slid the document toward me. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, official. At the top, in bold letters, it read, General Durable Power of Attorney. I reached for my reading glasses in my shirt pocket. My hand trembled slightly, not because I was acting yet, but because I was terrified. I put the glasses on and leaned over the paper. I might have been a mechanic, but that meant I knew how to read a manual. I knew that the devil was always in the fine print. You don't sign a work order until you know exactly what parts you are paying for. I scanned the paragraphs. Reynolds tried to turn the page for me to get to the signature line, but I held it down. Wait, I said, my voice raspy. Let me read. David sighed loudly. Dad, it is just standard legal stuff. Don't be difficult. I ignored him. My eyes darted across the lines of text. Clause 4 caught my eye. Granting the agent full authority to sell, convey, and encumber real property. Clause 7. Authority to access, withdraw, and close all bank accounts. Investment accounts and safety deposit boxes. Clause 9. Authority to change beneficiary designations. This wasn't a document to help me pay bills. This was a complete surrender. If I signed this, David became me. He could sell my house for $1 if he wanted. He could drain every cent I had. He could take whatever was on that USB drive if he ever found it and legally claim it was his to manage. This was a license to steal everything I had built in 72 years. I looked up. Reynolds was watching me with a bored expression, checking his watch. David was practically vibrating with impatience. I can't sign this, I said, pushing the paper away. It gives you too much power, David. You could sell everything. That is the point, Dad. David snapped, losing his patience. We have to sell everything to pay your bills. You are broke. Mom left us nothing. Remember. The bank box was empty. We need to sell the house to keep you off the street. I am not signing, I said, crossing my arms, not without talking to my own lawyer. The air in the room changed instantly. The pretense of civility evaporated. David kicked the folding chair, and it clattered across the concrete floor. Reynolds sighed, closing his briefcase with a sharp snap, but he didn't put the papers away. David leaned over the table, his face inches from mine. Listen to me, old man. You don't have a lawyer. You don't have money to hire a lawyer. You are sitting in a damp basement in my house eating my food. You are incompetent. If you don't sign this voluntary power of attorney, I will have Reynolds here file for emergency guardianship in the morning. And that takes time, David. I shot back, my voice stronger than I intended. And a judge has to see me. A judge has to declare me unfit. And I can talk to a judge. I can tell him you kidnapped me. David laughed. A dry, humorless bark. Kidnapped. I rescued you. You were wandering around confused. That is what I will tell the judge. And who do you think he will believe? The successful real estate agent's son, or the grieving, confused old man who thinks his wife was a secret millionaire? He grabbed the pen and shoved it into my hand. Sign it. Now. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the glass of water on the tray. I knew I couldn't win a physical fight. David was younger, stronger, and desperate. If I refused outright, he might beat me until I signed or forged my signature later. I needed to stall. I needed to buy time until morning. I needed them to leave the room so I could escape. I let my hand start to shake. I had seen my father suffer from Parkinson's years ago. I remembered the way his hands would flutter, like trapped birds. I channeled that memory. I let the tremor start in my fingers, then travel up my arm. Okay, I whispered, letting my voice crack. Okay, David. You win. I am tired. I just want to sleep. David's shoulders relaxed. Finally. Just sign on the line, Dad. Right there. I brought the pen down to the paper. My hand was shaking violently now, jerking back and forth. The tip of the pen scratched a jagged line across the paper, nowhere near the signature block. I can't, I whined. My hand. It won't stop shaking. I need water. David. I need water. I reached for the glass of water with my other shaking hand. David watched me with a mixture of disgust and triumph. He didn't see it coming. As my fingers closed around the glass, I let my wrist spasm. I jerked my arm hard to the left. The glass flew out of my hand. It didn't break, but the water, 20 ounces of ice-cold liquid, splashed directly onto the table. It soaked the power of attorney document instantly. The ink from the printed text started to bleed into a gray mess. The paper turned to mush under the puddle. Oh no, I gasped, dropping the pen. I am so sorry. I am so clumsy. David stared at the ruined document. The water dripped off the edge of the table onto his expensive loafers. His face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. You stupid old fool, he roared. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the wet paper jump. Reynolds stood up quickly, backing away to save his suit from the splash. Mr. Foster. That was the original Reynolds, said his voice cold. We need to print another one. I don't have a portable printer. David grabbed me by the collar of my shirt. He lifted me half off the chair. You did that on purpose. You are faking it. I let my head loll back, my eyes wide with feigned terror. David, please, I am sick. I am shaking. Look at me. He shook me hard, his teeth bared. Stop pretending. You are going to sign. Reynolds, go to your car and get another copy. We are doing this tonight. I don't have another copy in the car, David Reynolds said, looking at his watch. And honestly, if he is this agitated, a signature might be contested later as being under duress. Look at him. He is a mess. David shoved me back onto the chair. I slumped down, burying my face in my hands, trying to look pathetic while my heart hammered a war drum against my ribs. Fine, David spat. Fine. We will do it in the morning. Reynolds, come back at 8 a.m. Bring 3 copies. He pointed a finger at me. And you get some sleep. Because tomorrow morning you are signing that paper even if I have to hold your hand and move the pen for you. And if you spill water again, I will break your wrist. Do you understand me? I nodded, keeping my head down. Yes, David. Tomorrow. I promise. Or what, David? I asked softly, looking up at him one last time. Or I put you on the street, he said, his voice flat and deadly serious. I will drive you to the worst part of downtown and kick you out of the car with nothing but the clothes on your back. No ID, no money. You will be just another homeless old man freezing in the gutter. That is your future if you don't sign. He turned and stormed up the stairs, Reynolds following close behind. The lights flickered and went out, leaving me in darkness. The heavy door slammed shut. The deadbolt slid home with a screech of metal on metal. I sat in the dark, listening to their footsteps fade. My hand stopped shaking immediately. I wiped the water from the table with my sleeve. I was cold. I was hungry. And I was terrified. But I was also focused. I had bought myself 12 hours. David thought he had won. He thought I was broken and senile. He thought the lock on the door would hold me. But he forgot that I spent 40 years breaking into cars when people lost their keys. He forgot that I knew how things were put together and how to take them apart. I reached into my pocket and touched the USB drive again. Then I reached into my other pocket and pulled out the metal spoon from the dinner tray. I hadn't eaten the sandwich, but I had kept the spoon. It was cheap stainless steel, but it was strong. I looked at the door at the top of the stairs. Then I looked at the small utility room in the corner where the washer and dryer sat. There was a vent back there, a small square exhaust vent that led to the backyard. David had nailed the windows shut, but he probably hadn't checked behind the dryer. I stood up. My knees popped, but I felt strong. Stronger than I had in years. I wasn't signing anything tomorrow. I wasn't going to the nursing home. Tonight, Harold Foster was checking out. It was 2 a.m. when I finally moved. The house was silent above me, a heavy tomb of wood and drywall, where my son and his wife slept the sleep of the self-righteous. I had spent the last 4 hours grinding the handle of the stainless steel spoon against the rough concrete floor in the corner of the room. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. A rhythmic sound masked by the hum of the furnace. My hands were sore, my knuckles raw, but the handle was now filed down to a flat, sharp edge. It wasn't a craftsman's screwdriver, but for a man who once fixed a radiator hose with duct tape and a prayer, it would have to do. I crept toward the utility room. The door was locked from the outside, just like the main basement door. David had been thorough, but he was a real estate agent, not a mechanic. He looked at surfaces, curb appeal paint colors. I looked at structure. I looked at how things were put together. And he had made a critical mistake. The utility room door opened outward into the main basement area, which meant the hinge pins were on my side. I knelt down, my knees protesting against the cold cement. I inserted the makeshift tool under the head of the top hinge pin. I tapped the bowl of the spoon with the heel of my shoe. Clink. The pin moved a fraction of an inch. I held my breath, waiting for footsteps upstairs. Silence. I tapped again, harder. The pin slid up. I pulled it out with my fingers, grease from the hinge coating my skin. It felt familiar. It felt like work. It felt like freedom. The bottom hinge was stubborn, rusted tight from years of dampness. I worked the spoon handle into the gap, prying and twisting. The metal bent but didn't break. With a final groan of protest, the pin popped loose. I caught it before it hit the floor. Carefully, I pulled the door frame away from the jamb, setting it aside. The utility room was cramped, filled with the smell of lint and detergent. I pushed the dryer aside, straining against the weight. Behind it, just as I had hoped, was the dryer vent outlet. But it wasn't just a flexible hose. It was a rigid metal duct leading to a square vent in the foundation wall. It was small, maybe 10 inches by 10 inches. A tight squeeze for a teenager, let alone a 72-year-old man with arthritis. But it was the only way out. I grabbed a towel from the laundry pile and wrapped it around my hand. I punched the metal screen of the vent. It buckled. I pulled the jagged edges inward, creating a tunnel. Cold night air rushed in, smelling of wet grass and exhaust. It was the sweetest perfume I had ever smelled. I put my head in first. My shoulders scraped against the rough concrete of the foundation. I wiggled forward, using my elbows to drag my body. The metal edges of the vent tore at my jacket. I felt a sharp pain in my side as a screw caught my shirt, scratching skin. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. I thought about David upstairs, sleeping in his expensive bed, dreaming of selling my house. I thought about Sarah planning to dump me in a state facility. The anger was better than adrenaline. It pushed me through. With one final heave, I tumbled out onto the grass of the backyard. I lay there for a moment, gasping for air, staring up at the indifferent stars. I was out. I was covered in dust, bleeding slightly, and shivering in the night chill, but I was out. I didn't stay long. David had motion sensor lights on the garage. If I triggered one, I was done. I crawled on my stomach through the wet grass, mimicking the army training I had received 50 years ago. I reached the back fence, a wooden privacy barrier that had started to rot at the bottom. I pushed a loose board aside and squeezed through into the alley. Only when I was 2 blocks away did I dare to stand up and walk. I stuck to the shadows, avoiding the streetlights. I checked my pockets. The silver USB drive was there, warm against my chest. My wallet was gone. Sarah had taken it along with my phone, but I had a secret of my own. For 40 years, I had kept an emergency stash, a mechanic's habit. You never know when a tow truck driver needs cash. I had 3 $50 bills folded into a tiny square and tucked inside my left sock. I sat on the curb under a broken street lamp and took off my shoe. My hands shook as I unfolded the bills. $150. It wasn't a fortune. It wouldn't buy me a house or a lawyer, but it would buy me a ticket. I walked to the main boulevard. The city was asleep, but the city never truly stops. A police cruiser drove past slowly. I turned my face away, pretending to tie my shoe, my heart hammering. If David had woken up, if he had checked the basement, he would have called them by now. Elderly man, missing. Dementia. Confused. The officer would see a disheveled old man wandering at 2 a.m. and think he was doing a good deed by taking me back. I made it to the bus stop just as the night owl pulled up. The brakes hissed like a weary beast. The doors opened with a pneumatic sigh. The driver was a heavy-set woman with tired eyes who didn't even look at me as I fed the fare box. I moved to the back of the bus and sat in the corner. The bus was mostly empty save for a few souls who had nowhere else to be. A young man in a hoodie slept across the aisle, his head banging against the window with every pothole. A woman with too many bags muttered to herself 3 rows up. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. My hair was a mess, my face smudged with grease and dirt, my jacket torn at the shoulder. I looked like a derelict. I looked like one of the homeless men I used to pity when I drove past the park on my way to work. The realization hit me harder than the cold. I was homeless. I had a house I had paid for with 30 years of sweat, but I couldn't go to there. I had a son, but he was my jailer. I had a life just 48 hours ago, and now I had nothing but a piece of plastic in my pocket and the clothes on my back. The bus rattled toward downtown, moving deeper into the concrete heart of the city. The houses gave way to warehouses, then to glass towers that scraped the sky. This was the financial district, the place where money lived. It seemed alien to me. I was a man of the suburbs, a man of lawns and driveways. The bus terminated at the central station. I stepped off into the gritty pre-dawn light. The station smelled of diesel and urine. People were sleeping on benches wrapped in newspapers and old blankets. I found a corner away from the wind and sat down, pulling my knees to my chest to conserve heat. I watched the city wake up. Delivery trucks started to roll. Commuters began to appear, walking briskly with their coffees and briefcases. They looked through me. To them, I was just part of the scenery, another piece of urban debris. Panic began to rise in my throat. What was I doing? What was the plan? I couldn't go to the police. David would spin his story, and I had no proof of my sanity, just a wild story about a secret fortune. I couldn't go to my friends. They all knew David. He would have called them already. I felt the USB drive in my pocket again. It was the key. But a key is useless without a lock. I needed someone who could read it, someone who knew what it meant. Then I remembered the bank, the vault, the tall man with the white hair and the sad eyes. Mr. Sterling. David had been so focused on the empty box that he hadn't listened. But I had. Mrs. Foster told me this day would come, he had said. She told me you would be here. He knew. He knew Patty. He knew about the Tuesdays. And he had looked at me not with the dismissal everyone else showed, but with respect. I closed my eyes and tried to summon the image of the business card holder on his desk. It was gold-plated. I had stared at it while David was screaming. Sterling Wealth Management. That was it. He wasn't just a branch manager. He was something else. I stood up, my joints screaming. I had a name. I had a destination. I didn't know where his office was, but I knew where the bank was. And banks opened at 9. I had 4 hours to kill. 4 hours to stay invisible. 4 hours to survive until I could walk through those doors and find out if my wife had left me a lifeline or just a legacy of lies. I pulled my collar up against the wind and started walking. I wasn't Harold the victim anymore. I was Harold the mechanic. I had a problem. I had a tool. Now I just needed to find the mechanic who knew how to use it. The digital clock above the circulation desk read 8:15 in the morning. I sat at a computer terminal in the far back corner of the public library, huddled in my torn jacket, trying to make myself as small as possible. The library smelled of floor wax and old paper, a scent that usually brought me peace, but today it smelled like exposure. I wasn't the only one there seeking shelter. 2 rows over, a man with a beard full of crumbs was sleeping with his head on a newspaper. A woman with plastic bags was washing her face in the restroom. I fit right in. I was Harold Foster, the retired mechanic with a paid-off house and a pension, and yet here I was, indistinguishable from the destitute. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs every time the automatic doors hissed open. I expected to see a police officer walk in, scanning the room for the confused elderly man reported missing by his concerned son. I expected to see David's face, red with rage, peering over the tops of the bookshelves. I kept my head down, pulling the brim of my grease-stained cap lower. I had logged into the public computer using a guest pass the librarian gave me, with a suspicious look. Now the moment of truth had come. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver USB drive. It felt warm in my hand, almost vibrating with the secrets it held. I plugged it into the slot on the side of the battered monitor. The computer whirred and groaned. A small window popped up on the screen. It asked for a password. My stomach dropped. Of course. Patricia wouldn't have left it open. I stared at the blinking cursor. I tried her birthday. Incorrect. I tried our anniversary. Incorrect. I tried the date we bought the house. Incorrect. The screen warned me I had 2 attempts left before the drive locked. Panic started to rise in my throat, choking me. I closed my eyes, trying to think like her. What was important to her? What was the one thing she cherished more than anything else? I typed in a single word. Bluebird. It was the name of the first car I ever restored for her, a 1965 Mustang convertible. She loved that car. We sold it when David was born to pay the hospital bills. The screen flashed green. The folder opened. I clicked on the first file labeled Ledger. A spreadsheet filled the screen. It was a wall of numbers and dates stretching back decades. I squinted, trying to make sense of the columns. Date, symbol, quantity, price. I scrolled to the top. 1989. I remembered that year. It was a hard year. The transmission shop I worked at had cut my hours. We were eating pasta 5 nights a week. Patty had started taking in sewing work. I thought she was using the money for groceries. I looked at the entry for March 3, 1989. AAPL, Apple Computer. She had bought 500 shares. The price was listed as pennies compared to what I knew it was today. I scrolled down. 1994. AMZN. Amazon. Back when it was just a bookstore. She had bought 1,000 shares. 1998. MSFT. Microsoft. My breath hitched. I wasn't looking at a savings account. I was looking at a portfolio. Patty hadn't been hoarding cash in a coffee can. She had been investing. She had taken every spare dollar, every coupon saving, every cent from her sewing, and she had bet on the future. And she had won. I pulled up a calculator on the screen. I did the math for just the Apple stock, considering the splits over the years. The number on the screen was so large it didn't look real. It looked like a phone number. Millions. Just in that one line. I scrolled down through the years. There were dozens of companies. Some I recognized, some I didn't. But the pattern was the same. Buy low, hold, reinvest dividends. She had built an empire from our kitchen table while I was watching football. She was a genius. A silent, invisible genius who let the world think she was just a simple housewife. I closed the spreadsheet, my hands shaking so hard I could barely control the mouse. Why? Why hadn't she told me? We could have traveled. We could have fixed the roof without taking a loan. We could have lived without the constant low-level fear of poverty that hangs over working-class families. Then I saw the file at the bottom of the list. It was a video file simply labeled Harold. I looked around. I didn't have headphones. I turned the volume on the monitor down to the lowest setting and clicked play. A window opened. And there she was. Patty. She was sitting in her sewing room, the floral curtains behind her blocking out the sun. She looked younger, maybe 5 years ago before the sickness took hold. Her gray hair was pinned back and she was wearing her favorite blue cardigan. She looked straight into the camera, her eyes serious and sad. "Harold," she said, her voice tinny and quiet coming from the cheap speakers. "If you are watching this, I am gone. And you are probably angry. You are probably wondering why we lived like we did when we had this." She held up a stack of papers in the video. "I am sorry, Harry. I wanted to tell you 1,000 times. But I couldn't, because of him." She paused and looked away from the camera for a moment. When she looked back, her expression was hard. "I know you love David. He is our son. But you have a blind spot when it comes to him. You see the boy who scraped his knee. I see the man who stole from your wallet when he was 16. I see the man who forged your signature on that car loan in 2010. I gasped. I remembered that loan. David had told me it was a clerical error, a mistake by the bank. I had believed him. Patty hadn't. David has his grandfather's blood. "Harry," she continued, "he is a gambler. Not just with cards, but with life. He has a hole inside him that can never be filled. If he knew we had this money, he wouldn't just ask for it. He would destroy us for it. He would guilt you, he would manipulate you, and if that didn't work, he would find a way to take it. He would kill us, Harry, maybe not with a gun, but he would stress us into our graves." Tears blurred my vision. She was right. She had seen the wolf in our house while I was still trying to pet the puppy. "This money is for you," she said, leaning closer to the lens. "It is for your freedom. It is so you never have to be afraid. Go to Mr. Sterling. He knows what to do. Do not give David a dime until he learns to be a man. I love you, Harold. I did this for us." The screen went black. I sat there staring at my own reflection in the dark monitor. The tears ran down my cheeks hot and fast. She had protected me. For 35 years, she had carried this burden alone, smiling through the scrimping and saving, just to make sure that when the end came, I wouldn't be left helpless. She knew David would come for me. She knew he would strip me bare. I reached out to close the window to eject the drive. I needed to get to Mr. Sterling. I needed to secure this legacy. Suddenly, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. I jumped, my heart slamming into my throat. I spun around in the chair, expecting to see David's furious face, expecting to see a police officer with handcuffs. I grabbed the USB drive from the computer, ripping it out without ejecting it safely. It wasn't David. It was a security guard, a large man with a bored expression and a uniform that was too tight around the middle. He looked at me with disdain, his eyes scanning my dirty jacket. my unshaven face the wild look in my eyes. "Sir, you can't sleep here," the guard said, his voice loud in the quiet library. "And you can't use the computers for loitering. We have paying taxpayers who need these machines." "I wasn't sleeping," I stammered, clutching the drive in my fist. "I was just checking my mail." "You smell like a sewer," the guard said, wrinkling his nose. "You are disturbing the patrons. You need to leave. Now. Or I call the cops to trespass you." The cops. The word hit me like a splash of ice water. If the cops came, they would run my name. They would see the missing person report. They would call David. "I am going," I said, standing up quickly. My knees buckled, but I caught myself on the desk. "I am leaving." I grabbed my cap. I didn't look back at the screen. I didn't wait to see if I had closed the windows properly. I just turned and walked fast toward the exit. The guard followed me a few paces behind, herding me like cattle. I pushed through the doors and stumbled out into the bright morning light. The city noise assaulted me. Cars honking, people shouting, sirens wailing in the distance. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching the piece of silver plastic so hard my palm hurt. I was a millionaire. I was worth more than this entire city block. And yet here I was, being kicked out of a library like a stray dog. I looked down the street. I knew where the bank was. I knew where Mr. Sterling was. But between me and him was a city that was looking for me. David was looking for me. And now I knew exactly why Patty had been so afraid. The money wasn't just a gift. It was a target on my back. I pulled my collar up and started to run. Not a sprint, but a desperate shuffle, moving toward the one man who could turn this plastic key into a shield. I had 18 million reasons to stay alive, and one very dangerous son who would tear the world apart to find me. 5 miles doesn't sound like a long distance when you are driving a car or sitting on a bus, but when you are 72 years old and your shoes have thin soles and you haven't eaten a real meal in 2 days, 5 miles is a marathon. I walked through the city as the morning traffic turned into the midday lull. My legs burned with a lactic fire, and my bad knee clicked with every step, a painful metronome counting down the minutes I had left before my son found me. I stuck to the side streets, avoiding the main avenues where police cruisers patrolled. I kept my head down, my hat pulled low, clutching the silver drive in my pocket, like it was a grenade with the pin pulled. By the time I reached the address on the business card, I was drenched in sweat and trembling with exhaustion. Sterling Wealth Management was located on the top floor of a building that looked like a shard of black glass piercing the sky. It was the kind of place where the air conditioning smelled like money, and the floors were polished to a mirror shine. I stood outside the revolving doors for a moment, catching my reflection. I looked like a scarecrow. My jacket was torn from the escape, my pants were stained with basement dust, and my face was covered in gray stubble. I didn't look like a client. I looked like a problem. I pushed through the doors and approached the front desk. The lobby was vast and silent. A young woman sat behind a marble counter, typing on a sleek computer. She didn't look up as I approached. She just continued typing, her manicured fingers flying across the keys. "Excuse me?" I rasped, my throat dry from the walk. She stopped typing and looked up. Her eyes scanned me from my dirty shoes to my greasy cap. Her nose wrinkled slightly, a microscopic gesture of disgust that hit me harder than a slap. "Deliveries are at the loading dock in the alley, sir," she said, her voice cool and dismissive. "You can't be in the lobby." "I am not a delivery man," I said, trying to stand straighter to reclaim a shred of the dignity David had stripped from me. "I am here to see Mr. Sterling." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Mr. Sterling does not see walk-ins, especially not without an appointment. Please leave before I call security." "I am Harold Foster," I said, my voice rising. "He knows me. Tell him Harold Foster is here. It is about Patricia." The name Patricia seemed to hang in the air. The receptionist reached for the phone, not to call Sterling, but to call the guards. I was sure of it. I braced myself, ready to be dragged out, ready to fail after coming so far. But then the elevator doors behind her chimed and opened. "Wait," a voice commanded. I turned. Mr. Sterling was standing there. He was wearing a different suit today, navy blue with a silk tie, but his presence was the same. Calm, commanding, and utterly out of place with the modern coldness of the building. He looked at the receptionist, then at me. His eyes didn't show disgust. They showed relief. "It is all right, Jessica," he said, stepping forward. "Mr. Foster is a VIP client." The receptionist's jaw dropped. "But sir, he looks like a man who has had a very difficult week." Sterling cut her off. "Send coffee and sandwiches to the conference room. Immediately." He gestured for me to follow him. I walked past the stunned receptionist, my head held high, feeling a strange surge of adrenaline. Sterling led me down a long corridor lined with abstract art, into a corner office that had a view of the entire city. He closed the door, and the silence of the room wrapped around us. "Sit, Harold, please," he said, pointing to a plush leather armchair. I sat down, sinking into the soft material. It felt like a cloud. Sterling didn't go to his desk. He pulled a chair up opposite me, sitting knee to knee. "I was hoping you would come," he said softly. "When you didn't call yesterday, I was worried. Your son seemed volatile." "He locked me in his basement," I said bluntly. "I escaped through a dryer vent." Sterling nodded slowly, as if this was a reasonable course of events. Patricia feared he might resort to physical containment. She was a very astute woman, Harold. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a file. It wasn't thick, but it looked heavy. "You saw the box was empty at the bank," Sterling said. "That was by design." Patricia knew that if David ever got access to that box, he would loot it. The box was a decoy, a way to test his character. And I assume he failed. "He failed," I whispered. "He failed completely." Sterling opened the file. What was on that USB drive, Harold, was just the ledger, the history, but the actual assets, the legal structure that controls the money that is here with me. He turned the file toward me. I looked at the cover page. In bold letters it read, "The Project Freedom Irrevocable Trust." Patricia didn't just buy stocks, Harold, Sterling explained. About 10 years ago, when the portfolio hit the 10 million mark, she came to me. She was terrified. She saw David's gambling debts. She saw the way he looked at you, like you were a wallet and not a father. She wanted to ensure that no matter what happened to her, you would be protected. He pointed to a figure at the bottom of the page. So she liquidated a portion of the high-risk assets and moved them into this trust. It is an irrevocable trust, which means nobody, not David, not his creditors, not even a judge, can touch it without the trustee's permission. And I am the trustee, Harold. But the beneficiary is you, solely you. I looked at the number he was pointing to. It wasn't 10 million. Compound interest and wise reinvestment had done their work. $18,400,000. The room seemed to spin. I grabbed the arms of the chair to steady myself. 18 million. I was a mechanic. My best year, the year I worked 6 days a week and took every overtime shift available, I made $42,000. It would take me 400 years to earn what was on that piece of paper. I felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't joy. It was vertigo. It was the crushing weight of a secret my wife had carried alone while washing dishes and darning socks. "She did this clipping coupons," I whispered. "She did this by being the smartest person in the room," Sterling corrected gently. "She read financial reports like other people read novels. She saw patterns. She bet on the internet when everyone else said it was a fad. But she lived like a pauper because she was buying your freedom, Harold. She was buying you an escape hatch." He turned the page. "But there is a condition." Patricia called it the poison pill. She knew the laws, Harold. She knew that in this state, an elderly person with sudden wealth is a target for guardianship fraud. She knew David might try to have you declared incompetent to seize control of the trust. I knotted my throat tight. He tried last night. He tried to make me sign a power of attorney. He is filing for guardianship today. Sterling's eyes hardened. Then we are just in time. The poison pill clause is specific. It states that if any family member attempts to place you under involuntary guardianship or challenges your competency to manage your affairs, the trust automatically locks down. The funds are frozen for anyone but you. And if the court grants guardianship to David, the trust dissolves. Dissolves, I asked. Where does the money go? Charity Sterling said, a small smile touching his lips. Specifically, the Cat Fanciers Association and the Mechanics Union Scholarship Fund. David wouldn't get a dime. The house would be sold and the proceeds donated. He would inherit nothing but court fees. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. She had thought of everything. She had built a fortress around me from the grave. So he can't touch me, I asked. Financially, no, Sterling said. But legally, he can still make your life hell. He can freeze your movements. He can force you into a facility while the courts decide. We need to be proactive. We need to hire a defense team. We need to prove you are competent, and we need to do it before a judge signs any emergency orders. Just then the phone on Sterling's desk rang. It was a harsh, jarring sound in the quiet office. Sterling frowned. He stood up and walked to the desk, lifting the receiver. Sterling speaking, he said. He listened for a moment. His face went pale. He looked at me, his eyes wide with urgency. Yes, officer. No, I haven't seen him. Yes, I understand he is considered a missing person. Endangered. Yes, if he shows up, I will call. He hung up the phone slowly. That was the precinct, Sterling said, his voice low. David has filed a missing person report. He told them you have dementia and that you have a history of violent outbursts. He told them you might be armed. Armed, I said, standing up. I have a spoon I sharpened on a concrete floor. To the police, that is a weapon, Sterling said, moving quickly to the door. They are pinging your phone, but you don't have it, do you? Sarah has it, I said. Good, that buys us time. But they are checking your known associates. They will be here soon. David knows you bank with First National, even if he doesn't know about me. Specifically, he knows this is the money trail. We have to go, Harold. We have to get you out of here before they put you in a patrol car. Once you are in the system, it is 10 times harder to get you out. He grabbed his coat. I have a car waiting in the garage. I have a safe house, a hotel that doesn't ask questions. And I have the best lawyer in the city on speed dial. You are not going back to that basement, Harold. You are a millionaire, and today you are going to start fighting like one. Come with me. I followed him, my heart hammering against my ribs again. I was rich. I was protected. But I was also a fugitive. The sirens wailing in the distance weren't coming for a criminal. They were coming for a father whose only crime was surviving his son's greed. We moved fast. Mr. Sterling didn't run, he just walked with a terrifying efficiency that parted the air in front of him. He led me through a door marked "Employees Only," just as the heavy glass doors of the lobby slid open to admit 2 uniformed police officers. I saw them through the crack in the doorframe. They were scanning the room, hands resting near their holsters, looking for the dangerous dementia patient my son had conjured out of lies. We took the freight elevator down. It smelled of industrial cleaner and hydraulic fluid, a smell that usually comforted me but today just reminded me of the basement. When the doors opened in the parking garage, a black sedan was waiting. The engine was idling, a low purr that vibrated in the concrete echo chamber. A driver in a dark suit opened the back door before we even reached the car. I slid onto the leather seat, and Sterling followed, closing the door and sealing us in a capsule of silence and safety. Go, Sterling said to the driver. The car surged forward, slipping out a side exit, just as a police cruiser turned into the main entrance, lights flashing. We merged into the city traffic. I shrank back into the seat, afraid that someone would look through the tinted glass and recognize me. Sterling handed me a tablet. You need to see this, Harold, he said, his voice grim. You need to know what we are up against. This isn't just a missing person report. I looked at the screen. It was a social media post on a neighborhood watch page. There was a photo of me taken at a barbecue 2 years ago where I looked a bit disheveled after grilling for 4 hours. Above it, the caption read, "Urgent alert. My father, Harold Foster, has wandered away from his caregivers. He suffers from advanced dementia and paranoid delusions. He may be carrying a weapon and is considered a danger to himself and others. Do not approach him. Call 911 immediately. He is confused and violent." Below the text, there were hundreds of comments. People offering prayers. People saying they would keep an eye out. David was playing the heartbroken son perfectly. "He has hired a private investigator," Sterling said, taking the tablet back. "A man named Brannigan. He is dirty, but he is effective. He is pinging your old cell phone, but since Sarah has it at the house, the signal is stationary. That is confusing them for now. But Brannigan is checking credit card activity. He is checking hospitals. He is checking bus stations. David wants you found, and he wants you isolated before you can talk to anyone." "He is trying to bury me," I whispered, staring at my grease-stained hands. "He is painting a picture of a monster, so no one will listen to the man." "Exactly," Sterling said, "which is why we need to change the man." The car pulled into the underground entrance of a hotel I had only ever seen in magazines. The Four Seasons. We didn't go to the front desk. We went straight up in a private elevator to a suite on the 30th floor. The room was bigger than the entire ground floor of my house. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I had lived in all my life, but had never seen from this angle. There were clothes laid out on the bed. A suit. A crisp white shirt. New shoes. "Get cleaned up," Harold Sterling said, pointing to the bathroom. "Wash off the basement. Wash off the victim. When you come out, you will meet the man who is going to help us destroy David's little play." I went into the bathroom. It was all marble and gold fixtures. I turned on the shower and stood under the scalding water for a long time. I scrubbed my skin until it was red. I washed away the dirt from the dryer vent, the grease from the hinges, the smell of mildew and fear. I watched the gray water swirl down the drain, taking the old Harold with it. The Harold who apologized for existing. The Harold who signed checks for ungrateful children. When I stepped out, wrapped in a thick robe, room service had arrived. A steak, roasted potatoes, vegetables that crunched. I ate like a starving wolf. I hadn't realized how empty I was until the food hit my stomach. With every bite, I felt my strength returning. The door to the suite opened. Sterling walked in, followed by a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. He was bald, built like a linebacker, and wore a suit that cost more than my car. He didn't carry a briefcase. He carried an aura of absolute aggression. "Harold, this is Mr. Stone," Sterling said. Stone didn't smile. He held out a hand that engulfed mine. "I hear you have a pest problem," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "I am the exterminator." I shook his hand. I liked him immediately. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me like I was a client with a job to do. "Sit down," Stone said, pulling a chair to the dining table. "We don't have much time. Your son has escalated the timeline." He opened a folder. Inside was a copy of a court filing stamped with today's date. "David filed an ex parte motion for emergency guardianship an hour ago," Stone explained. "He is claiming imminent harm. He says you are mentally unstable, homeless, and armed. He has an affidavit from a doctor who never examined you claiming you have rapid onset Alzheimer's. He has a statement from your daughter-in-law saying you threatened them with a knife." "A knife," I said indignantly. "It was a spoon. I sharpened a spoon to escape their basement." "To a judge, a sharpened spoon is a shank," Stone said dismissively. "It doesn't matter what the truth is, Harold. It matters what the paperwork says. And right now, the paperwork says you are a danger. David has requested an emergency hearing for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" I asked. "Yes. He is moving fast because he is broke. He has a buyer lined up for your house, a developer who pays cash. They are scheduled to close tomorrow afternoon. David needs that guardianship order at 9 so he can sign the deed at 2. If he gets that signature, your house is gone, bulldozed, and your assets, whatever he can find, will be drained to pay his debts. He wants to sell my home tomorrow, I whispered. The anger that had been simmering in my gut boiled over. It was a cold, hard rage. That house was where I carried my wife over the threshold. It was where we raised him. He isn't just selling the house, Stone said, leaning forward. He is trying to erase you. Once he has guardianship, he can place you in a lockdown facility. He can medicate you into silence. He can make sure you never tell anyone about the USB drive. He is betting everything on you not showing up. He is betting on you being a scared, dirty old man hiding in an alley. I looked at the suit on the bed. I looked at the reflection in the window. I saw an old man, yes, but not a weak one. I saw a man who had fixed engines that other mechanics had given up on. I saw a man whose wife had believed in him enough to leave him a fortune. What do we do? I asked. We crash the party, Stone said, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. We show up. We don't file a counter-motion tonight. We let him walk into that courtroom thinking he has won. We let him lie to the judge. We let him dig his hole deep. And then we walk in, you, me, and Sterling. Can we stop him? I asked. With $18 million behind us, Harold Stone said, we can do more than stop him. We can bury him. But you have to be ready. You have to stand in front of that judge and look sane, look strong, and look like a father who has been wronged. Can you do that? I stood up and walked to the bed. I picked up the white shirt. The fabric was soft silk or high-grade cotton, I didn't know, but it felt like armor. I am not just a father anymore, I said, unbuttoning the robe. I am the man Patricia knew I could be. I dressed slowly. The trousers fit perfectly. The jacket settled onto my shoulders like it belonged there. I tied the tie with a knot I hadn't used since my wedding day. I looked in the full-length mirror. The man staring back wasn't the mechanic in greasy coveralls. He wasn't the prisoner in the basement. He was clean. He was sharp. His jaw was set in a line of granite determination. I looked at my hands. They were still calloused, still scarred from years of labor. The suit couldn't hide the work, and I was glad. Those hands built things. Tomorrow they were going to dismantle my son's life, piece by piece. I turned to Stone and Sterling. I am ready, I said. Let's go get my life back. Stone nodded, closing his folder. Get some sleep, Harold. Tomorrow is going to be a bloodbath. And David Foster isn't going to know what hit him until the gavel falls. Scene 9, the courtroom theater. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety, a scent that seems to permeate every family court in America. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. The room was sparsely populated, mostly lawyers whispering to their clients and clerks, shuffling endless stacks of paper. In the front row sat David and Sarah. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. David wore a somber black suit, his tie loosened just enough to suggest a man who had been up all night worrying. Sarah sat beside him, clutching a tissue to her nose, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. If I didn't know better, I would have believed them myself. They looked like grieving children, desperate to save their father from his own decaying mind. Judge Harrison entered the room. A man with a face carved from granite, and eyes that had seen too many broken families to be easily moved. He took his seat at the bench and adjusted his glasses. He looked at the docket, then down at David and Sarah. Case number 4927. In the matter of the emergency guardianship of Harold Foster, the clerk announced. Mr. Reynolds stood up. He buttoned his jacket, attempting to look grave and responsible. Your Honor, we are here under tragic circumstances, he began, his voice pitching low and respectful. My client, Mr. David Foster, is the only son of the proposed ward, Harold Foster. As you know, Mr. Foster's wife passed away just last week. He paused for effect, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Since the funeral, Harold Foster has suffered a catastrophic mental decline. Reynolds continued. He has become paranoid, aggressive, and delusional. 2 days ago, he fled his son's home in the middle of the night, armed with a sharpened metal object. He has been missing since then, wandering the streets of this city alone, confused, and vulnerable. David let out a small, choked sob. Sarah rubbed his back protectively. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Your Honor, Reynolds said, gesturing to the empty table where I should have been sitting. We have filed a missing person report. We have hired private investigators. But the fact remains that Harold Foster is 72 years old. He has no money. He has no home, as his own residence is currently uninhabitable due to neglect. He is out there somewhere, likely freezing and terrified. Reynolds walked toward the bench, handing a file to the bailiff. We are asking the court to grant emergency temporary guardianship to his son David. We need the legal authority to locate him, to hospitalize him for his own safety, and to secure his assets so they can be used to pay for the long-term care facility he so desperately needs. We are not asking for this power lightly, Your Honor. We are asking for it to save a father's life. Judge Harrison flipped through the file. He looked at the affidavits. The fake doctor's note David had procured. The statement from Sarah claiming I had threatened her. The police report listing me as endangered. This is very concerning, the judge said, looking over his glasses at David. Mr. Foster, have you had any contact with your father at all? David stood up slowly, his hands trembling. No, Your Honor, he said, his voice cracking perfectly. I just want him safe. He doesn't know what he is doing. He thinks he is rich. He thinks my mother left him a fortune. It is part of the delusion. He is out there chasing fantasies while his real life falls apart. I just want to bring him home. Sarah sniffled loudly, dabbing her eyes. We just want to take care of him, she whispered loud enough for the judge to hear. The judge nodded sympathetically. The narrative was perfect. The caring son, the demented father, the urgent need for intervention. It was a rubber stamp case. The system was designed to protect people like the version of Harold they had invented. It wasn't designed to protect the real Harold from predators like his son. The judge looked at the empty chair at the respondent's table. He checked the clock on the wall. It was 9:15. Well, given the urgency of the situation and the evidence presented regarding Mr. Foster's mental state and the immediate danger he poses to himself, I am inclined to grant the emergency petition, Judge Harrison said. He reached for his gavel. The sound of his hand moving across the wood of the bench was the only sound in the room. David looked down at his lap to hide his face. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was smiling. He was doing the mental math calculating the sale price of my house minus the closing costs. He winked at Sarah, a quick, tiny spasm of his eyelid that said we did it. He thought he had won. He thought the game was over. The judge lifted the gavel. I am granting emergency temporary guardianship of the person and estate of Harold Foster to David Foster, effective immediately. The court orders that all assets be frozen and transferred to Boom. The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They exploded inward, hitting the backstops with a sound like a thunderclap. The noise echoed off the high ceilings, shattering the somber atmosphere David had worked so hard to create. Every head in the room turned. The bailiff reached for his belt. The stenographer stopped typing. David and Sarah spun around in their seats, their mouths falling open in identical expressions of shock. I stood in the doorway. I wasn't the shivering, dirty old man from the bus station. I was wearing a charcoal gray Italian suit that cost $3,000. My shirt was crisp white, starched to perfection. My shoes shone like obsidian. I stood tall, my shoulders back, my chin raised. I looked like a senator. I looked like a CEO. I looked like a man who owned the building. Flanking me were 4 men. Mr. Sterling stood to my right, looking distinguished and lethal in his navy suit. On my left was Mr. Stone, a man whose physical presence alone seemed to take up half the room. Behind us were two junior associates carrying boxes of files. We looked like an invasion force. David's face went white. All the color drained out of him, leaving him looking sickly and gray. Sarah grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging into his sleeve. They stared at me as if I were a ghost rising from the grave to drag them down to hell. Judge Harrison lowered his gavel slowly, his eyes wide. "Who is this?" he asked, though I think he already suspected. I walked down the center aisle. My footsteps were loud and rhythmic on the hard floor. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound of authority. The sound of consequences coming home to roost. I didn't look at David. I didn't look at Sarah. I kept my eyes fixed on the judge. When I reached the respondent's table, I didn't sit down. I stood there, gripping the back of the chair, my knuckles white not from fear, but from the sheer power of the moment. "Your Honor," I said, my voice booming through the silent courtroom, steady and clear. "I apologize for my tardiness." I paused, looking slowly at David, letting him see the fire in my eyes, letting him see that the father he thought he could crush was gone, replaced by something much harder. I was busy counting my wife's money. A ripple of shock went through the room. The court reporter gasped. David made a strangled noise in his throat. "Mr. Reynolds jumped up, knocking his chair over. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This man is Harold Foster Tone," interrupted his voice, a deep rumble that drowned out the other lawyer. "And he is here to contest this fraudulent petition with extreme prejudice." Stone slammed a heavy file onto the table. The sound was like a gunshot. "Your Honor," Stone continued, stepping into the well of the court. "We are appearing on behalf of Mr. Foster. We have evidence that the petitioner, David Foster, has committed perjury, filed false police reports, and is attempting to use this court to commit grand larceny against his father." David stood up, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He is crazy. Your Honor, look at him. He is delusional. He thinks he has money. He is homeless." I turned to David then. I looked him up and down, taking in his cheap suit, his sweaty forehead, his desperation. "I am not homeless, son," I said calmly, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I just bought the penthouse at the Four Seasons. And as for the money..." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver USB drive, holding it up so the light caught it. "Mom didn't leave us nothing, David. She left me everything. She just made sure you couldn't touch it." The judge looked from me to David, then to the team of high-priced lawyers standing behind me. He set his gavel down. "Mr. Reynolds." "Sit down," Judge Harrison ordered. "Mr. Stone, you may proceed. And someone get the court reporter a glass of water. It seems this hearing is just beginning." I sat down in the leather chair and crossed my legs, adjusting the crease in my trousers. I looked at David one last time. The smirk was gone. The arrogance was gone. In their place was the terrified realization that he had just picked a fight with a man who could buy and sell him 10 times over. The theater was over. The trial was about to begin. Mr. Reynolds tried to object again, stammering something about relevance and procedural errors, but Stone silenced him with a single raised hand. It was a gesture of such absolute authority that even the judge leaned back, waiting to see what would happen next. Stone didn't pace. He didn't shout. He simply walked to the center of the room and placed a small remote control on the defense table. "Your Honor," Stone said, his voice calm and resonant. "The petitioner claims my client is incompetent. He claims Mr. Foster is unaware of his surroundings and unable to manage his affairs. We are not here to debate medical opinions from doctors who have never met the patient. We are here to present testimony from the one person who knew this family better than anyone. The one person who predicted this exact moment would happen." Stone pointed the remote at the large flat-screen monitor, mounted on the wall to the left of the jury box. The screen flickered to life. Static hissed for a second, followed by the familiar hum of an old webcam adjusting its focus. Then Patricia appeared. The air left the room. It was as if a ghost had walked through the walls. David gasped a sound that was half sob and half scream. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with terror. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. Seeing her there, so alive, so vibrant, it broke my heart all over again, but it also gave me strength. On the screen, Patricia adjusted her glasses and looked directly into the lens. The date stamp in the corner read March 14th, 2023, just 6 months ago. "Hello, David," Patty's voice said. It was soft but firm, the voice she used when he was in trouble at school. "If you are seeing this, it means I am gone. And it means you have done exactly what I was afraid you would do." David started to shake. He looked like he wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't work. He was glued to the chair, forced to look at the mother he had betrayed. "You are probably sitting in a courtroom right now, trying to take control of your father." Patty continued on the screen. "You are probably telling a judge that Dad is old and confused. You are probably saying you are doing it for his own good." She paused and leaned closer to the camera. Her eyes seemed to bore straight into David's soul. "Stop lying, David. We both know why you are there. You are there because you found the bank book or the card, and you think there is a fortune waiting for you. You think you hit the jackpot." In the courtroom, dead silence reigned. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys, mesmerized by the woman on the screen. "I loved you, David," Patty said, her voice cracking slightly. "I loved you more than my own life. But love doesn't mean I was blind. I knew about the gambling. I knew about the loan shark in 2010. David flinched as if he had been slapped. "You forged your father's signature on the deed to the rental property," Patty said. "You took out a second mortgage to pay off your debts. You thought we didn't know. But the bank called me. I paid it off, David. I used my savings to clean up your mess so your father wouldn't find out. So he wouldn't have the heartbreak of knowing his son was a criminal." Reynolds looked at David with horror. He started to inch his chair away from his client. And in 2018, Patty went on relentless. "The retirement fund. You accessed my online account. You transferred $12,000. You told us it was a hacking incident. You helped us file the police report. I saw the IP address, David. It came from your office. I replaced that money too. I covered for you again and again because I kept hoping you would change. I kept hoping you would grow up." On the screen, Patty wiped a tear from her eye. "But you are a bottomless pit, David. No matter how much love or money we pour into you, it is never enough. You always want more. And I knew that when I died, you would come for Harold. I knew you would try to strip him bare." She took a deep breath, composing herself. "So I made a plan. I built a wall around your father that you can never climb." The video cut to black. The courtroom remained silent for a long heartbeat. Then Stone stepped forward again. "Your Honor," Stone said, "the video you just saw is part of the digital will and testament of Patricia Foster. But it is not just a goodbye. It is a legal trigger." Stone picked up a thick document bound in blue paper. "Mrs. Foster established the Project Freedom Irrevocable Trust 18 years ago. The trust holds assets currently valued at over $18 million. A collective gasp went through the room. David looked like he was going to vomit. 18 million. The number hung in the air, taunting him. However, Stone continued, his voice hardening. "The trust contains a specific clause. Article 42, the poison pill." Stone opened the document and began to read. "If at any time any beneficiary or family member petitions a court for involuntary guardianship, conservatorship, or any form of legal control over Harold Foster, or challenges his competency to manage his own affairs, such action shall immediately trigger the disinheritance clause." Stone looked up from the paper, staring directly at David. "The clause states that upon the filing of such a petition, David Foster and his descendants are permanently removed as beneficiaries. They shall receive nothing, not a cent, not now, not ever. David let out a low moan. No, no, that is not legal. You can't do that. It is perfectly legal, Stone said, slamming the document shut. And it gets better. The clause further states that in the event of such a betrayal, the entire corpus of the trust shall remain under the sole discretionary control of Harold Foster for his lifetime, and upon his death. Stone paused, letting the suspense build. Upon his death, if this clause has been triggered, 100% of the remaining assets shall be liquidated and donated immediately to the National Veterans Association and the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. David's eyes rolled back in his head. He slumped forward, catching himself on the table with both hands. He was hyperventilating. He had done it. He had pulled the trigger. By filing that piece of paper this morning, by trying to steal the house and lock me away, he had incinerated his own inheritance. He had turned $18 million into dust. Sarah was screaming now. Not a scream of fear, but of pure, unadulterated rage. She turned on David, hitting him on the shoulder with her fist. "You idiot," she shrieked. "You said he was senile. You said we would get everything. $18 million, David. We could have been rich. We could have had everything." "Order," Judge Harrison shouted, banging his gavel. "Order in this court." But Sarah didn't stop. She was clawing at David's face, her nails leaving red streaks. "I divorced you. Do you hear me? I am done. You are a loser, David. A broke, pathetic loser." The bailiff moved in, pulling Sarah away. She was sobbing hysterically, screaming about money, about wasted years, about how much she hated him. David didn't fight back. He slid out of his chair and fell to his knees on the dirty courtroom floor. He looked at me. His eyes were empty holes. He looked like a man who had just watched his house burn down with him inside. "Dad," he whispered. "Dad, please." I didn't know. I stood up. I walked over to him. I looked down at the son I had raised, the son I had protected. Patty was right. He was a bottomless pit. And for the first time in 45 years, I stopped trying to fill him. "You knew enough, David," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. "You knew I was your father. You knew I loved you. And you decided that wasn't worth as much as a quick sale on a bungalow." I looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I believe this petition for guardianship is moot. I am quite capable of taking care of myself, and I have the resources to ensure I am never a burden on the state or my son again." Judge Harrison looked at me with a mixture of awe and respect. He banged his gavel one last time. "Petition denied with prejudice," the judge ruled. "The temporary restraining order against Mr. David Foster is granted. Mr. Foster, you are free to go, and, might I add, sir, well played." I turned my back on David. He was sobbing into the carpet, a broken man surrounded by the wreckage of his own greed. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy, finalizing sadness. But as I walked toward the doors flanked by my team, the weight on my chest began to lift. I was free. Patty had bought my freedom 35 years ago, one Tuesday at a time, and now I was going to live it. The heavy double doors of the courthouse swung open, and I stepped out into the blinding midday sun. The air smelled of exhaust and hot asphalt, but to me it smelled like oxygen. It smelled like a second chance. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs, trying to purge the stale scent of the courtroom and the lingering odor of my son's betrayal. Mr. Sterling walked beside me, his presence a quiet comfort, while Stone and his team flanked us like a Praetorian guard. We were heading toward the curb, where a long, sleek black limousine was waiting, its engine idling with a low, powerful hum. I was halfway down the concrete steps when I heard the doors crash open behind us. The sound was followed by the frantic clatter of dress shoes and heels on stone. "Dad. Dad, wait." It was David. He was running toward me, his tie flying over his shoulder, his face a mask of sheer panic. Sarah was right behind him, her mascara running down her cheeks in black rivulets, her earlier rage replaced by a terrifying realization of what they had just lost. Mr. Stone stepped between us, holding up a hand like a traffic cop. "Mr. Foster, stay back. You have a restraining order against you. If you come any closer, I will have the bailiffs arrest you right here." David didn't stop. He didn't even seem to hear him. He threw himself past Stone, ignoring the lawyer's bulk, and collapsed onto the concrete right at my feet. He grabbed my leg, wrapping his arms around my calves like a drowning man clutching driftwood. He was sobbing. It wasn't the fake performance grief he had displayed in the courtroom. This was real. This was the guttural, ugly crying of a man who sees the executioner's axe falling. "Dad, please," he wailed, burying his face in the fabric of my new trousers. "I am sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong." I looked down at him. The top of his head was thinning just like mine had at his age. He was shaking violently. "Dad, you have to help me," David choked out, looking up at me. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, terrified. "I am in trouble, Dad. Deep trouble. It isn't just credit cards. It isn't just the bank. I owe money to bad people, Dad. Loan sharks. The kind of people who don't send letters. They said if I didn't pay them by Friday, they would kill me." He squeezed my leg tighter, his fingers digging in. "We are family. Dad," he pleaded. "You can't let them kill me. You have $18 million. It is nothing to you. Just pay them off. Save me. Please. I am your son." Sarah stood a few feet away, twisting her hands. "Harold, please," she whimpered. "We made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but we were desperate. We can be a family again. We can fix this. You can't leave us with nothing." I stood there frozen. I didn't try to kick David off. I just looked at him. Suddenly, I wasn't on the courthouse steps anymore. I was back in the basement. I could feel the damp cold seeping into my bones. I could see the plate of dry, curling bread they had slid onto the box for my dinner. I could hear David's voice through the door, muffled and cruel, laughing about selling my home. He won't know the difference. He is just a useless old man. I remembered the way he shoved me onto the sofa when we found the bank box empty. I remembered the contempt in his eyes when he threatened to throw me on the street. He hadn't seen a father then. He had seen a piece of trash. And now, looking at him groveling in the dirt, I didn't see a son. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot. Anger burns. This was cold. It was a physical dropping of temperature, as if my heart had turned into a block of ice. It was the feeling of a door closing and locking forever. It was the feeling of love finally running out of fuel. I looked at David's tear-stained face and I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no love, no hate. Just a vast Arctic silence. I reached down and peeled his fingers off my leg one by one. He tried to hold on, but I was stronger. I had worked with steel my whole life. My hands were iron. "Get up," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. David scrambled to his knees, looking hopeful. "Dad, you will help me." I stepped back, smoothing the crease in my pants. I looked him in the eye and saw the stranger inside him. "I don't have a son," I said calmly. David recoiled as if I had struck him. "What? Dad, what are you saying?" "My son died the same day his mother did," I said, my voice steady, carrying over the noise of the city traffic. "The boy I raised, the boy I taught to fish, the boy I loved. He is gone. I don't know who you are." "Dad, stop!" David cried, reaching for me again. "No," I said, stepping out of his reach. "You are a stranger. A greedy, cruel stranger who kidnapped an old man and locked him in a basement. You aren't family. You are a predator. And I don't feed predators." David's face crumbled. "But they will kill me, Dad. They will actually kill me." "Then you better start running," I said coldly. Or get a job. I hear the ride-share apps are hiring. It pays about $5 a trip. If you work 14 hours a day like I did, you might be able to pay them back in about 50 years. I turned away from him. It was the hardest thing I had ever done and the easiest. I turned my back on my own blood, because he had turned his back on my humanity first. Mr. Sterling stepped forward. He tapped his phone. "Now, officer." Two police officers who had been standing near the entrance moved in. They weren't coming for me. They were coming for David. "David Foster," one of the officers said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "We have a warrant for your arrest." David scrambled backward, crab-walking on the pavement. "What?" "No, for what? Identity theft, fraud, and elder abuse," the officer said, grabbing David's arm and spinning him around. "We have the video evidence from your mother's trust regarding the forged car loans and the stolen retirement funds. And we have a statement regarding the unlawful imprisonment of Mr. Harold Foster." David screamed. "No! Dad, tell them! Dad, stop them! You can't let me go to jail!" Sarah shrieked and tried to run, but a female officer blocked her path. "Sarah Foster, you are also under arrest for conspiracy and elder abuse." I didn't look back. I walked toward the limousine. Mr. Stone held the door open for me. I slid into the cool leather interior. The air conditioning hit my face, washing away the heat of the day. Outside, I could hear David screaming my name. It was a raw, desperate sound. A week ago, it would have broken me. Today, it just sounded like noise. Sterling got in beside me and closed the door. The sound of the screaming was instantly cut off, replaced by the hush of the luxury cabin. "Are you all right?" Harold Sterling asked gently. I looked out the tinted window. I saw the police shoving David into the back of a cruiser. He was thrashing, crying, kicking. He looked like a child throwing a tantrum. But he wasn't a child. He was a 45-year-old man who had made his choices. I watched the police car lights flash red and blue. "I am fine," I said. And I was surprised to find that it was the truth. "Drive," I told the chauffeur. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked, looking in the rearview mirror. "Anywhere," I said, leaning back and closing my eyes. "Anywhere but here." The car pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic. I left my son behind on the sidewalk, handcuffed and broken. I left the old Harold back there, too. The man in the car was someone new, someone with a frozen heart, perhaps, but someone who was finally completely free. 2 weeks later, I stood on the sidewalk in front of the bungalow for the last time. The for sale sign in the front yard already had a bright red sold sticker slapped across it diagonally. I had reclaimed the deed thanks to Mr. Stone's legal shark work, but walking back inside felt like walking into a mausoleum. The silence was too loud. Every corner held a ghost. The kitchen where Patty hummed while she cooked. The living room where we watched Wheel of Fortune. The back room where David had ripped our lives apart, looking for gold. I realized I couldn't live there anymore. The walls had absorbed too much sadness, and the floorboards creaked with the weight of betrayal. It wasn't my home anymore. It was just a house. So I sold it. I sold it to a nice young couple with a baby on the way, and I took every cent of the profit and did exactly what Patty would have wanted. I walked into the local community college and endowed the Patricia Foster Memorial Scholarship for young women in finance. It was my way of letting her genius live, on letting her help other women build their own safety nets so they would never have to be afraid. I turned my back on the bungalow and walked toward the curb where my new life was idling. It wasn't a car. It was a beast. A 45-foot luxury motor coach painted a deep, shimmering midnight blue. It cost $500,000. It had heated marble floors, a master bedroom with a king-size mattress, and a windshield that offered a panoramic view of the world. Patty and I had talked about driving across the country for 40 years. We collected brochures. We watched documentaries about national parks. We saved our pennies in a jar labeled travel, but the jar always got emptied for braces or car repairs or David's tuition. We never made it past the county line. I wasn't going to let the dream die with her. I was going to take her with me. I climbed the steps into the bus. The air smelled of new leather and possibility. In the driver's seat sat a man named Michael. He was a retired long-haul trucker I had hired because my eyes weren't what they used to be, and I wanted to watch the scenery, not the road. He was quiet, respectful, and drove like the bus was made of glass. Ready. Mr. Foster, Michael asked, looking back at me. I sat down in the passenger captain's chair, which swiveled to face the massive front window. I patted the breast pocket of my shirt, where I kept Patty's photo. I am ready, Michael, I said. Head west. Let's see what is out there. As the bus hissed and pulled away from the curb, I felt the last tether to my old life snap. I watched the neighborhood roll by. The grocery store where Patty clipped coupons. The school where David learned to lie. The bank where the empty box sat. It all faded into the distance, replaced by the open highway. We drove for days. We saw the cornfields of the Midwest turn into the flat expanse of the plains. We saw mountains rise up like jagged teeth against the horizon. I ate dinner in diners I had only read about. I slept in a bed that rocked gently with the wind. For the first time in 72 years, I didn't have to be anywhere. I didn't have to fix anything. I just had to exist. 3 weeks later, we parked on the edge of the world. The Grand Canyon spread out before us, a vast wound in the earth that bled purple and gold in the setting sun. It was so big, it made everything else feel small. My problems, my pain, my son, they all seemed insignificant against millions of years of rock and river. I sat in a folding chair outside the bus, a glass of vintage Bordeaux in my hand. The wine cost $300 a bottle. It tasted like berries and smoke. I took a sip and let the warmth spread through my chest. The wind blew through the canyon, carrying the scent of sagebrush and ancient dust. My phone buzzed on the small table beside me. It was a new phone, a smart one with a screen as clear as a television. The caller ID said Sterling. I picked it up. Hello, Mr. Sterling? Good evening, Harold Sterling's voice was crisp and clear. I hope the view is treating you well. It is magnificent, I said, watching a hawk circle the updrafts. You should see it. Perhaps one day, Sterling said. I am calling with an update regarding the legal situation back home. I took another sip of wine. Go ahead. David called my office today, Sterling said. He is currently being held at the county detention center. His bail has been set at $50,000. He claims he doesn't have it. He was begging for you to post it. He says he is sorry. He says he is scared. He asked if you would authorize a transfer. I looked at the canyon. I thought about the $50,000 David had tried to steal from me. I thought about the $50,000 Alfred had given me to start my new life. It was a poetic number. I swirled the wine in the glass, watching the red liquid coat the sides. I remembered the cold basement floor. I remembered the fear. I remembered Patty's voice in the video saying, "He is a bottomless pit." Mr. Foster, are you there? Sterling asked. How would you like me to handle it? I smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile. It was the smile of a man who had finally put down a heavy load he had been carrying for too long. Tell him I am busy, I said, my voice light and airy. Tell him I can't come to the phone right now. Busy doing what Sir Sterling asked, although I could hear the smile in his voice too. Tell him I am going to the bank, I said. The bank, sir. Yes, I said, looking at the sun dipping below the rim of the canyon, setting the world on fire with light. I am making a deposit into my memory bank. It is the only account that matters anymore. I hung up the phone. I didn't block the number. I didn't need to. David was in the past, a ghost haunting a house I no longer lived in. I picked up the phone again and opened the banking app Sterling had installed for me. I wanted to check one thing. The screen lit up with a soft blue glow. Account balance, Project Freedom Trust. The numbers scrolled across the screen, crisp and white against the dark background. $18,350 on $1,000, and I looked at the number. Then I looked at the sunset. The money was security, but the view that was wealth. I raised my glass to the horizon. To you, Patty, I whispered. Thank you for the ride. I sat there until the stars came out, millions of them diamonds scattered on black velvet. I was Harold Foster. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was rich, but I wasn't greedy. I was just a man enjoying the view from the freedom seat, finally driving his own life. Harold's journey teaches us a harsh but necessary truth: shared DNA does not guarantee shared values. Sometimes the people we raise can become our most dangerous predators when blinded by greed. Patricia's secret wasn't an act of deceit, but a masterstroke of protective love, proving that financial independence is the ultimate shield against elder abuse. The most profound lesson here is not about revenge, but about the courage to set boundaries. We must learn to distinguish between those who love us for who we are and those who love us for what we can give them. Saving yourself is not selfishness, it is survival. If you were in Harold's shoes, standing on that curb with millions in the bank, would you have turned back to save your son, or would you have driven away toward freedom? What defines true loyalty? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe for more stories about justice and redemption.